Thank you. Yeah, let's get started. We'll start with our welcome. So welcome everybody, and then if we can have a roll call for attendance.
Yeah, Shannon Ortland. Beto Garibay.
Here.
Patrice Guillory.
Here.
Gilbert Salinas. Shayla Bonner.
Here.
Matthew Malone.
Here.
5 members present, quorum is established.
All right. Thank you. And then we'll do our introductions for folks on Zoom, starting with you, Ariana.
Hello, my name is Gariana Youngblood, and I'm with the Office of Reentry and Justice.
Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris James with the W. Haywood Burns Institute.
Kendra.
Hi, everyone. Kendra Carr with the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice.
Denise.
Hi, everyone. Denise Zabkevich with the Office of Reentry and Justice.
Jill.
Good afternoon, Jill Ray with the Office of Supervisor Candace Anderson.
And Peter.
Good afternoon, Peter Kim with the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice.
Thank you everyone for being here. Next we want to open it up for any announcements. Any announcements at this time?
So I have one. One of my roles at the court ongoing is administrator of the temporary judge program. So for those of you who have or know lawyers who are interested in becoming temporary judges with the court, we are always looking for, it's a volunteer service. What they do is they replace our commissioners in our primarily unlawful detainer, small claims and traffic, also probate if they are experienced in probate. But we are constantly on the look for volunteers. We have our hardest slot to fill, so to speak, is when we have a commissioner in Richmond who is not available. We have a hard time getting volunteers in Richmond. But generally speaking, we're always looking for attorneys to volunteer. So for those of you who happen to know attorneys who would be interested in that, you have my contact information on the emails that come out through the committee. I'm happy to speak with anybody about the program in more detail, but send them my way, please. And I can talk them through all the qualifications. I won't go into that here, but essentially they have to be tenured out as the first qualification. So they need to be there first, but after that, I'll walk with them. I think they might need help. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll share that we are getting really close to issuing out a new solicitation for our restorative justice demonstration project. It will be focused on violence prevention among young people. So the target group will be age 8 to 24. And it will have a pretty robust evaluation component to it. We're hoping to have entities that are either community-based organizations, schools or school districts, cities. We're widening the scope of eligibility for those who can apply. This will be a demonstration pilot, so it's not intended to be a program necessarily that will be funded in perpetuity, but it is our way of responding to our needs assessment that we conducted with utilizing Measure X dollars to see how we can best embed restorative practices and programming in the community going forward. So we hope that at the end result of that project, we can show out some results to the community and to the Measure X CAB, and possibly board of supervisors, to show where best to place some additional resources if we want to see that work happening on an ongoing fashion. So all to say that we're looking to issue out that RFP sometime next month, mid-September. We will be hosting some info sessions to kind of generate interest. I think the dates we have tentatively scheduled would be for September 10th and the 12th. These will be virtual webinars that anyone can join. So you will be getting a e-blast from us fairly soon to share that information out. Really excited to move into the next phase of our restorative justice work that's being funded through Measure X funds.
Jill, I see your hand up.
I just wanted to find out from Matt where I can find more information on that so that we could share it.
So it's on a, yeah, what I can do is it's on our temporary judge website. So if you search Contra Costa temporary judge, the first result will be our website for temporary judges. On that, you'll have all the training requirements, the application. It's a lot of information though. So there's an email address, tempjudge@contracosta.courts.ca.gov. That's the same extension I have for my email address, but it's just tempjudge, one word. That comes to me, and that's where I can answer any questions. That's linked on that website as well. And again, I'm happy to answer any other questions as people have them.
Perfect, thanks.
Peter?
Yeah, a couple quick updates from our office. So we just went ahead and completed a RFQ process that secured a consultant, a research consultant, to conduct a feasibility study for our African American Holistic Wellness and Resource Hub. So this has actually been a bit of a process that we're really glad to see the completion of. The board approved the award go to Series Policy Research, and they're going to be conducting a feasibility study around where a potential location can be for the first hub, what kind of services should be delivered out of the hub, what the cost and investment might be. And they're going to do a pretty intensive community engagement process to receive their feedback and insight to inform their recommendations. So that contract actually just got processed and started last week. So we're really looking forward to starting that work. Kendra, you want to share the update on the upcoming RFQ?
Yeah, I'll share that update. And also we have a hiring update. Well, soon to be hiring update. But first for our, there's another pot of money that the Board of Supervisors set aside of Measure X funding for African American wellness services. Peter and I, because of the capacity of our office, we released an RFQ to partner with the Community Foundation to hold the funds, distribute the funds, and create contracts with the grantees. And so we are re-releasing that RFQ on Monday. So we'd greatly appreciate any support you can provide us in getting the word out. We're looking for a community foundation to just administer the funds. And we'll share updates along the way. And this is for those who are providing services for African Americans in the county. But the hiring update is the one I'm most excited about because we need some capacity. So mid-September, around mid-September, after the board approves this equity analyst new job classification we created, we'll be hiring a data analyst and a budget and policy analyst. And so we'll ask all the partners that are connected to our job to help us in getting the word out, and we'll share some recruiting materials we created. But really looking forward to expanding our office capacity. So just wanted to share those updates.
And maybe just a point of clarity regarding that $1 million allocation. We're actually going to be ultimately releasing two different solicitations. So this first one that's releasing out on Monday is just for a community foundation to contract with community-based providers to do the services. We will be releasing a subsequent RFP that will actually be soliciting for the service providers to deliver those services. So it's going to be two separate solicitations, one after the other, just for clarity.
Anyone else? I don't want to miss anybody. Right. So agenda item number 2, public comment on any item under this jurisdiction of our job and not on this agenda. Now it's time for her public comment. Right, hearing and seeing none, we can move to item 3, which is to approve our record of action for June 27, 2024. And it's attachment number 1, is 4 through 6.
I move that we approve the record of action.
Is it public comment first or vote?
Yeah, you can ask for comment.
Okay. At this time, we'll open it up for public comment on this agenda item. Comment, can we do a roll call vote?
Absolutely. But before, who was the second?
Shannon?
Shannon. All right, gotcha. And yes, a roll call vote. Shannon?
Yes.
Garibay?
Yes.
Patrice?
Yes.
Shayla?
Yes.
4 yeses, motion carries.
Oh, that's right.
I don't
I always do
vote.
that. Do that. You got it.
That's why I don't second.
Yeah.
Just trying to
That's
stay.
right.
Item number 4 is to discuss polling of different agencies on data collection.
Yeah, so I'll give some context to this. During our last meeting, we kind of talked about needing to take a step back and really evaluate and see where various agencies, justice agencies, are where they're at in terms of their capacity to collect and share out information, given what is being charged to this subcommittee and to our job overall to track and monitor where the disparities lie across the justice system so we can see points where there's a need for interventions. And so even though over time there have been asks of different agencies to produce ongoing reports, and then also asks made down to at the local city levels of police departments to see if they could provide resources. Obviously, a lot of that work had been put on hold and on pause. So as we are revisiting this conversation, the thought was to maybe it's best to poll where are all of at least the county justice agencies and then adjacent agencies such as Office of Ed and then Health Services in terms of their capacity to capture some of this information that would likely be needed to see a person's trajectory across the justice system from juvenile into the adult criminal justice system. So I'm forgetting the exact questions we asked, so forgive me, that went around to all of the partners. And at this time, we only received responses from the Sheriff's Office and the Public Defender's Office. But if either of you guys are here that you feel like you can speak to your agency's capacity, as well as probation, we can do that as well. Let me just pull it really quickly what the questions were. But what you have in front of you, we didn't have this in time to be able to include in the agenda. So for those online, we do have handouts of those responses from the Public Defender's Office and the Sheriff's Office with us here. We did, oh, it's right here. We did ask about whether or not agencies are able to collect specific demographic information, such as race and ethnicity, age, sex and gender identity, locations, and demographic information of other parties involved. Then we also asked about process and outcome data relevant to the respective agencies' operations. Therefore, issues or information related to intakes or bookings, charge, petition filings, adjudication or convictions, sentencing, diversion or alternatives to incarceration, suspension, expulsion, etc. And then lastly, the other data related point that we asked about was whether or not there were other relevant information affecting youth and adults within the justice system, such as socioeconomic indicators or health indicators, if they were collecting that information or had the capacity to do so. We also asked if there are other specific data points that other agencies would like to just simply see that wasn't raised in that polling. So that's what was posed to all of the agencies. I can kind of go over really briefly what the Public Defender's Office offered. In terms of demographic information, they are able to share, let's see, race and ethnicity. They did say yes, but they do not use the U.S. Census Bureau's distinction of race versus ethnicity and rather combine the two in one question. So there will likely be different practices applied in terms of the type or the way in which agencies collect certain demographic information. So that's something to note in case there's a need to have some sort of standard practice across the board yeah, I'll leave it at that. Then there's age. They are able to collect age. Yes, both current age and age at the time of an alleged incident. Sex and gender identity. They are currently collecting female, male, unknown, and non-binary. Those are the categories. And in legacy systems or from older cases, they were able to collect only female, male, and unknown only. For locations, they do have place of residence of any of their respective clients, and then location of alleged incidents, demographic information of other parties involved. They are not able to collect that currently, but that is a work in progress. In terms of process and outcome data relevant to their agency's operations, they're able to provide dates of incidents, dates of arrest, dates of issuance of charges by a law enforcement agency to the DA, date of referral by DA to courts and Contra Costa Public Defender's Office, date of case disposition when the case was resolved, and then they do capture intakes and bookings, charge and petition filing, though it is not in a single centralized location. And all the remaining adjudications and convictions, yes. Sentencing, yes. Diversion, yes. Suspension and expulsion, where they do have that information that they are able, they have it. They do also collect some socioeconomic indicators related to their clients. However, it is not easily, it's not easy to analyze or not analyzable is the word they use. And then health indicators such as like disabilities, homelessness, education, other factors that relate to health status. They're able to collect some of it, but it's not really analyzable. And they are able to provide more specifics around that for a future date. I think ultimately a major synopsis to share, they were able to upload the type of data system that they have available, but they also acknowledge there are different units within their agency that are also collecting their own local sources of information via spreadsheets and Microsoft databases, and they are working to consolidate that. So that's kind of it in a nutshell for the Public Defender's Office. We do have a summation from the Sheriff's Office. I don't know if you want to provide a overview on data needs and.
I met with the assistant sheriff. It kind of went over. It was kind of hard to kind of pinpoint some of this info down.
Yeah.
But I did my best, and so I typed up kind of the summary. So currently, to kind of best explain, the sheriff's office runs multiple operating systems, Marquette, RMS, Aries, and ATIMS, to name a few. Although they can provide, data and specific information, they don't automatically generate the collection of this data. And we rely on our managers throughout the different divisions to collect like basic information, demographics, race, age, gender, arrest numbers, crime classification, date of incidents. volumes of calls for service, things that you would see in the quarterly report, right? So everything you see in there is collected by us mostly manually. However, we do have a specialist from tech services, and what he does is he creates what we call crystal reports. So the best way to explain it is that he sort of looks at the boxes and creates like a filter on what we want to extract. So it's such a broad thing that what do we want to ask for? So if we tell him something specific, he'll be able to know whether he can actually extract that information and generate the report. So it's one person though, which is why we have such a delay on getting some information, and we rely on the managers. On the custody side of things, we have the ATIMS operating system, and so that the vendor, this is a paid for service. So the sheriff's office has to pay a few $1,000s in order to generate the report whenever we request it. So it's not automatically done. It's not a contract, but and again, that information is included in the quarterly report. Arrests, bookings, age, name, gender, to name a few. So we are limited. We do rely on manual extraction of data, and depending on whether the filter is available to extract a specific need, it's kind of on a case-by-case basis, unless it's the general one that we've already done. And obviously it's time-consuming. Regarding like relevant information to those affecting within the justice system, we don't really have anything that tracks any socioeconomic or health indicators apart from, mental health illness generated reports. As far as like from the judicial side, convictions, sentencings, although we run a court security unit, these things are not tracked by the sheriff's office. So we would have to go to the courts in order to get that information. With that being said, the sheriff's office is looking at a few RFPs right now for a new CAD system. And one of the vendors is Axon. If you're familiar with Axon with the body worn cameras, I think they have a great system. But with that, you're still looking at a 5-year plan in order to implement that. Also looking at upgrading our data collection capabilities and fulfilling some needs. Looking at partnering with Peregrine Technologies. And essentially, they'll provide like a platform to consolidate, if you will, instead of us having 8 or 9 operating systems, it's under one. And so that platform will allow us to engage better with the data, access it much better, and use it as needed, and implement any of the information as we see fit. In addition to these upgrades, I know that we're trying to get staffing levels up, trying to implement a manager position along with 3 more programmers that would help us collect the information that we're seeking. And it's kind of where we currently stand.
You all like to? I know this was kind of a.
I know I owe a response still to this because it's a complicated kind of question for the court. Yeah. We use, as I think everybody here knows, we converted to a new case management system about 2 years ago, Tyler Odyssey, which gave us the capability to do a little bit more with the data than our old case management system in terms of producing reports. That said, the court itself does not collect the information that's being asked for here. It may get some of that information through interfacing either with, but I think there is an interface with Carpel that may end up, or one of the other systems that may end up transmitting some of the demographic information. The court itself does not collect or verify it. Now, that's not to say it doesn't appear in individual case files, right? So, for example, if you were to pull case number X and look in, there's going to be reports and there's going to be things that would indicate that. But in terms of aggregate collection of the data, that's just not something the court has. We can run and have run some anonymous. You have to, because of the Penal Code 13300, you can't really produce a lot of criminal data. I mean, sometimes between organizations that are authorized there, that's fine. But so we have produced some anonymized reports. Denise and I worked on one, I remember, a while back. So we have some capability. Our strength would be in numerical reports versus reports of person X going through the entirety of the system. That second part is not something that the court systems are capable really of doing. And or could we necessarily release all that information in the kind of public facing way that I think ideally this committee might want. There's just too many privacy prohibitions that are gonna stop us there. So that is again, when we talk about outcome data, we're not going to know intakes, bookings, et cetera. We would have a record, again, in these individual cases of a charge being filed or an adjudication. But the ability to cross-reference that, for example, with particular demographic data, we cannot do. And so when I see the public defender's response about not being easily analyzable, that's the kind of what I'm getting at. It's hard for us to do kind of any data that would combine different data points like that. And we would not track, for example, socioeconomic or health indicators. There'd be no way we would track that in any kind of aggregate sense. So I don't mean to say, I mean, I feel like I'm saying we don't. It's just not something that the court systems are really set up to do. And so that's, in terms of looking forward, what I will say is, I have mentioned, and I'm sure I'm not the only person in a court across the state that has mentioned that there is much more interest from outside the court about this kind of data and about how we can see through moving through the court how we can study outcomes, et cetera, in a way that benefits the missions. There are other counties, obviously, I think that have bodies like this one. And I think that increasingly courts are going to be asked for this data. The direction that we're going to take is going to have to come from the Judicial Council, and it's going to have to get before the Judicial Council, and they're going to have to make a decision about how courts kind of generally would change their information practices. We're governed by rules of court that set out how a court can release particular case-based information to the public. There may need to be some adjustments to that if, in fact, it becomes a statewide priority. The problem is that we run our courts. There's 58 counties, and maybe in a dream world, I think we would all operate off the same system and the same. We'd all be pacer like the federal courts are. We'd all have it together. Instead, we have, I think, 27 courts on Tyler, something like that. Some on the Thomson Reuters product, some on another product. So we're also, when the Judicial Council looks at this, it's facing inconsistencies between the different systems. And I know, and look, so to the extent we can provide things, we're happy to do it. I just want I want the limitations to be known and out there. And that's all I'll say about that.
And that's precisely why
yeah.
This conversation is so important. It's just so we can get a clearer picture of where those challenges lie for us. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Office of Ed, you guys have a robust system. You can tell us everything.
We don't. We actually collect a lot of data that other agencies don't, just because we have to, like, for low income or unduplicated pupil count that the LEAs get funded by through the LCFF, the local control funding formula. So we do have that type of data. And we also have ethnicity and race. But in talking to the superintendent, we have two systems, ARIES. We use ARIES as well for our student programs, and a system called ASAP for our adult ed. So we only really have the experience or the student or adults academic journey through our county. We don't have any access to their if they have any records or bookings or any such as those. So we do have data. We have a lot of data, but it's like the courts, our LEAs, we don't have their data. They all have their own systems. So Martinez, Pittsburgh, Antioch, they all have their local SIS or student information system, and then they feed it into what's called CalPads that it goes to the state, and that is what we get the public data from. But it's usually at an aggregate level, so you can't identify. So we do have data, but not a lot of requested data.
Sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And Denise, while you're on, you want to give an overview of probation's data capacities that you've seen both ends, ORJ's work and our research and analysis and what we have access to, and then what the full department has been able to bring online as of late.
Okay. Well, we have obviously access to public domain data. That's where I mostly started a lot of our work with the DOJ Open Justice data set. It is de-identified and it's limited, but it still can tell a story as it relates to some particular outcomes. It will let us know whether or not a petition was filed or not. It identifies one of 5 different types of offense types. So, you know, you've seen this part of the data before. We also have access to CDCR data, and we have one data pull from them. It is really rather a coup for the probation department or a feather in our cap or something to actually have this data. It was quite a heavy political lift to get it because CDCR and DOJ didn't really talk to each other and they needed to for this. So we have that data, but we haven't done anything with it yet just because of our own staffing constraints. So we know what's going on with individuals in the prison systems. We have a sense of the services that they have been provided, their programs that they've participated in, if any. There's a learning and reading assessment, I think, that gets done there too. We have that. But again, I have not had the bandwidth to look into it. They are very, very strict about who accesses the data and how long we can have the data because I'm no longer going to be leading that part of the project and Christina is gone. The other individuals that we'll be bringing on board will need to go to San Quentin and go through the entire CDCR process. So we're waiting to hear guidelines on that. We also have a really lovely relationship with the Sheriff's Office, who has been providing me with annual bookings data for the last 5 years. So we know about bookings and we've been using this for our recidivism analysis. And that has been great. That does have race and sex in there. And Beto, maybe you can refresh my memory on this. I recall that this was information that was brought into the booking record by visual on law enforcement officer. So individuals were either provided, we took it from either a driver's license or it was a visual. So there's no real way to know how accurate that is, but it's the best proxy we have. And we are now linking or taking a giant step forward to linking our Tyler database, our case management system for probationers, all probationers, with our AB 109 service provider data. So that's a big step for us. It obviously needs to have some barriers in place with regard to access so that we can be certain that the appropriate information is only allowed to go to the appropriate direction. But basically, we will be able to draw data from both systems to determine who are AB 109, for example, probationers, and have they sought services from our AB 109 providers? Did a probation officer make that referral or not? Or did that come from another service provider, and what kind of outcomes are there? So is there anything else I'm missing, Patrice?
You talked about bookings, but then also you might want to say even on the juvenile side.
Yeah, this is all, yeah, right. And then we have on the juvenile side, the juveniles are also in Tyler, so that's really great. But we also have very restricted access to the JCPSS data, which is the juvenile court data that goes to the state. So we are utilizing that in a de-identified way to see how RIPA data aligns with what's actually happening in the courts and coming through, and there's not a very good match there, so that is no surprise. But we've also utilized that data for just trends and various outcomes for young people, nowhere near the depth that we actually could. But, you know, actually, I have a question to put back out to the body, and particularly for you, Matt, is, you know, one of the reasons why we started getting the data from the sheriff's office was because we really wanted to get a valid estimate of recidivism. And in order to do that, we need to ask the DOJ, does our population, have they reoffended in any other county in the state? And in order to do that, we needed to have CI&I. And I wonder, does the court keep track of CI&I too? Can we link some of these data sets that way and de-identify them name-wise, but link them with their criminal identification number?
I have no idea, unfortunately. That's a question I'd have to ask. I just don't know either way.
Because I would think that the district attorney's office would have something like that too, if they are reporting up to the state on some level. And I know they must be, because I think dispositions are there. So I just keep thinking that that is such a key number for us, at least for adults, and even for juveniles, because we've just recently started collecting CI&I and holding that in a store in our database for juveniles, so that we can continue this process of looking forward and looking at trajectories of involvement. But without a single number, and the CI&I seems like the most the best one, that would be a good point to link on, especially given that we don't want to have identifying information. So no names, no DOBs, but if we have a valid CI&I, we can link it and do analyses that way.
The abbreviation you're using, CI&I, what is that?
I think it's criminal identification.
It's an individualized identification number. Yeah. This associated
and it's at the state level. It's at the state level. So when I got the first pass of data from the sheriff's office, it was de-identified, but it had CI&I. And so what I did was I sent that list of CI&Is to the DOJ, and they sent back to me records for that individual for any county jurisdiction in the state. So we could see if somebody had, and particularly in the Bay Area where there's no real boundaries as it relates to where people go and BART and stuff like that, we could have a much higher recidivism rate than we would expect. But I can't see what's going on in Alameda or Solano or San Francisco, but I can if I have a CI&I and get that information from the DOJ. Trying to think if there's anything else. And yeah, and we just have the one key piece of information that I think is really, really critical that kind of goes to the education data is, does this individual have some kind of intellectual or learning disability? And if we can find a way to link that data with our juvenile justice data and follow those outcomes, even if we are trying to match, it would be interesting to try to match just on date of birth, sex, and date of arrest or referral to see if we can get a decent linkage that way and follow individuals, particularly by whether or not they have an IEP or not.
Thank you, Denise.
Yeah.
So
there's lots.
So we're hearing there's a lot of information being collected, I'm sure. All of which are relevant.
Patrice, can I add one more thing that I failed to add about the CDCR data and the DOJ data? So in this process with gathering this data, I got it from the DOJ and that was great. But then working with Mia Bird at Berkeley, who's affiliated with Cal Policy Lab, we had put in place a memorandum of understanding, kind of a DSA, where our data has now been ported there. And she and her team will be looking at cleaning the CDCR data because they know that so much better than we do. And then pending what our research questions are, they will be able to link it to our probation records as well as to our bookings data. So we can see what's gone on for individuals that have been returning to the community here or have been charged here and going to another community. So that is that MOU is in place, although, again, we haven't made a lot of progress on that at all. But we're close to starting. Baby steps, right?
Right. So from what we're gathering, there's a lot of information around, but having to sort through some of the various limitations, and then to also determine what is it that we want to gather and grasp from all of this information is really important, I guess, for this body and the full body to really determine. As Denise mentioned, we're certainly on the path of looking at how best to link client information to see how they move about throughout the system and what other sort of underlying issues or indicators that would help us best understand the characteristics of the population and where are the best points of intervention, right? And so but it's quite robust work. I think we all are feeling the crunch of like constraints, whether it be staffing, whether it be the systems themselves. I mean, the good thing to know is that so many of the departments, from what I'm hearing, are having newer systems coming online. So new technology is being made available, but even with bringing that online, it requires testing and adjustments and all of that. And then the last frontier, if you will, is being able to analyze all the information. So that's kind of
Sure. Patrice, I just want to reinforce something that you mentioned here, is that all of our data linkages and all of our data asks must be grounded in a specific research question. We cannot link this CDCR data without identifying what is the question that we want to ask. Are we, and particularly with justice-related data, are we talking about understanding the pattern of arrest and convictions? Are we trying to understand what's going on for individuals and a trajectory who could have multiple arrests and convictions? The data linkage with CDCR, probation, and other sources is very different depending upon what the underlying research question is. And that's the thing that has been so tricky, is to what are the priorities that we're trying to look at? And are we trying to look at patterns and trajectories of justice involvement for particular groups of individuals in the community? Or are we trying to, look at something else?
That's a good point. And I know that, so that's the good caveat to the fact that one of our job recommendations, right, was about having this ongoing sort of data collection to best understand where the disparities lie. But is that sufficient enough?
No.
And it sounds like it's not. Like, it has to be, it's too broad, and it has to be, as you said, grounded in some kind of question that we want to have answered through the information that is available. I don't want to take over.
Yeah.
See Chris's.
I couldn't hear. I apologize if this has already been spoken to and I just missed it. But for the local agencies, do we know if race and ethnicity, or even gender information is self-reported, or how that information is extracted? And do we get, and with that answer, might there be a sense that there's a need to sort of support or promote the standardization of something like that?
Well, Chris, let me ask you a question. When you say local agencies, what are you talking about specifically? Are you talking about like data on arrests and bookings?
Sure. So data on arrests and bookings, like when I say local agencies, so I know that what you've discussed has included some state level stuff that I wouldn't be referring to, because I doubt that we would have any level of impact or influence on it. So, more curious about, say, probation and the sheriff's office, and what the practice is around how that information is collected to be reported in the first place, right?
Well, I know probation has, as best as possible, the same kind of limitations surrounding race and ethnicity that the district attorney's office has. We have now, used to have just males and females, and then missings, which we always consider unknown or just missings. We're now doing I think it's non-binary, and the racial and ethnic categories are broader, and but I don't know when we started doing that, if that was just with our new data system or not. But typically, probation has this kind of information. Yeah, and what I mentioned earlier about the bookings data, the bookings data has, again, also the same limitations surrounding, gender identities and sexual orientation, as well as race and ethnicity. So, and you know, one of the biggest problems, and I mentioned this fairly recently, is the DOJ has the state. Okay, the data that we look at from them comes from us and all the other counties in the state, and they do not have a category for, say, Asian. It gets lumped into other. And it's like, really? I got called out on this by somebody in, I believe it was San Ramon. I have a jurisdiction that's, you know, full of Southeast Asian families. How come you're not monitoring that? And it's like, well, the DOJ is not. So, you know, maybe we want to start moving in a direction that way, but I have not done that because I've been trying to align what we do and understand it as it relates to the data that we have at the state, just primarily because access to data has been so difficult. But they're really good points, Chris. Really good.
Yeah, I appreciate all that analysis. I think just as a follow-up, just to make sure I'm clear, because I certainly get the limitations with the categories, but say if let's say a young person comes into probation or you know a similar office, are they asked what their race or ethnicity is, and then at some point, if say they say Asian, then we recognize within the office that we have to assign them other because that's the limitation that we have, or is there some other sort of method by which the race is determined?
Good question. I am not sure of the exact process at intake for youth. Kimmy would be a much better person to ask that because she is somebody who looks at that data all the time. But yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Could we ask the sheriff that's in the room how that's collected?
Yeah, but this is for juveniles, Jill, and this would not go to the sheriff's office. It would come to probation. And we know about the adults, right? The adults, from what I understood, were visual or driver's license IDs.
Well, the juveniles are picked up by a law enforcement agency, and one of them could be the sheriff. So that's why I'm asking.
Correct. So the arresting agency are the ones that fill out the booking paperwork. And so through experience, it's the officers that make the arrest that fill out the booking sheet. They ask the individual all the questions regarding race, sex.
Okay.
And then they provide that to, if they're coming into, for the adults, if they're coming into one of our facilities, typically they'll do a review of the booking. I don't know if they go over every single thing regarding their gender and race, but it's possible. I just don't know if there's a double layer that's occurring. They just kind of rely on it unless it's left blank. I know this for a fact. If it's left blank when they review the charges with the individual as they process them, they'll try to fill in those blanks, and that's when they get asked. So it's typically from the arresting officer, unless left blank. Then the intake deputies will go over that form with them.
I think the other question is, what categories are there to choose from on the form? Is it Black, white, or Hispanic or other, or is there Asian? Is there?
I can only speak for the sheriff's office. The form, those slots are left blank. So when we fill them in, we'll write whatever they tell us. And as far as when it comes to booking, I don't know exactly what the drop-down list is currently. It's been a while since I've worked in the custody and did that sort of work. I do recall it being there's another category, but I think we have expanded since then. To what extent, I don't know. I know that now there could be a Pacific Islander that in the drop-down. I just don't know where we sit with it exactly.
Hi, this is Peter. You know, we had a conversation with, oh no, it was at the last or a couple board of supervisor meetings ago when the sheriff was presenting his quarterly report to the board around data. And I remember there was a question from one of the supervisors asking, around how data is entered when it comes to where, not just where the incident occurred, but where the person lived and like their place of residence. And because of that interest, I believe the sheriff said that there was a new kind of category or new field that the arresting officer had to complete, and that you couldn't, I guess, proceed to the next page, if I'm understanding correctly, in that form, or you couldn't submit it unless that required field was submitted. So, and I thought that was great. That kind of is a way to ensure that folks are entering at least that required data. So I'm wondering if there is particular data fields that we feel we need to collect consistently. Is that one mechanism through which we can try to ensure that arresting agencies are actually not leaving fields blank, but actually entering that data? Because if they don't, then the fields you can't even submit until that is filled out.
Well, I'll tell you, we are just had this conversation just today that we are going to require sex and racial characteristics and date of birth as well, and set it up with criteria so that it's not left blank and that it fits within expectations surrounding date of birth. So for example, you get a year of birth of 2020, and as was pointed out to me, we don't serve 4-year-olds, right? So that's an invalid. So, you know, putting those kinds of checks and balances in place for data entry is what makes the most sense. And you still don't know if what you're getting is valid information. Somebody could lie. And if you're doing it based upon a visual, you know, we all know how fraught that is. So, you know, but certainly setting the system up so that it will not accept a new record without these fields is a really great start. And we're doing it because we've got not so great data around this with our service providers. But yeah, there's a lot of missing data.
Thank you for that. Anything?
No, the only thing left to probably add is that we can still follow up with the DA's office to see if they are able to share out as well about, and also health services. We know obviously health services will have a lot of this information, but they also run detention health. So they'll also have some justice related data, I'm sure, they're also collecting. So we'll continue this work to just kind of, again, get a broad understanding of where folks' capacity is at and report that back.
I think we're good to move to item number 5, which is to discuss and review data sharing agreements. And that's attachment number 2, 7 through 9.
Yeah, and we also made a point to include in here that one of the activities that were aligned to the our job work plan was to develop sort of like an MOU or a data sharing agreement. So what we have for you is an attachment to an example of a data sharing agreement that was done by County of Santa Barbara. And this included all of the county's justice agencies and some of the terms or stipulations within that MOU. This would allow them to create an integrated justice information system. So obviously this is something very much so robust. It addresses issues around CORI and HIPAA information. I do know since this was done a launch, which I believe was back in 2018 or 2019, somewhere around that time. They have tried to move forward to see if there was a way to also integrate health related information. But that is I think that's a issue for them. I don't know why this thing did this weird
The format.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, you don't walk in and submit the letters and.
But anywho, but this on this first page is a blurb from the county's realignment plan where they created their own criminal justice data committee. Almost not unlike this kind of subcommittee, but it is a committee of various IT systems folks, data analysts, what have you, that are within those various justice agencies that come together and kind of govern, if you will, how data is collected, shared, and spit out for various purposes, right? So I'll give you all an opportunity to kind of take a look at the MOU and see what your thoughts are. But ultimately, we want to share this out as an example of what's possible in terms of, you know, the data sharing across the different departments on justice-related work. And I want to say on page 18 of the chart of the agenda is a snapshot. I don't know if you can read it well, of the data sharing flow chart. So you can kind of see what the processes entail in terms of how data is retrieved and then the authorization process for how data can be utilized and shared. They also create, which we didn't include in here because talk about really getting into the weeds. They have created their own data dictionary. And Denise, you probably can explain it better than I can. But essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, it is almost like a guidebook of the respective identifiers of certain data that is needed to be consistent across the board. Did I get that right? And it's this guidebook that they all kind of agree to, that this is what this data would mean or look like and what have you. Did I share that? That was my best layman's terms.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's the data keys. So what are the variables or the data elements like a CI&I that would link this data across agencies? And there may be a number of them, you know, but they would identify, so CI&I, date of birth, last name, sex, race, etc. And they might link on all of those things, and there would be, or those characteristics would be identified as a data key to linking across various institutions. And then the data dictionary also often goes into and serves almost like a glossary to say, these are the, for say a disposition type. There's only 4 disposition types and these are what they mean. And so it serves in that mechanism as well. And by the way, the only people who can update this or have access to this is the court. So it sort of explains the boundaries and with the various data and the role of various data.
A couple comments, a couple questions. So as I read this, then what it's designed to do is provide a framework for any of the 5 entities identified on the first page to, between and among themselves, agree to share data. Now, I'll tell you that when we converted to Odyssey, there are MOUs that the court currently has, I believe with both the DA and the PD, at least, and there may be others here they do, that do talk about access to the court systems. And the reason for that is that if you know, as I mentioned earlier, we're governed by the rules of court on how we grant access to the systems. And heightened access is permissible for obviously attorneys of record in particular cases. And that's kind of the basis for separate agreements with the DA and the PD, where they would have different access than the general public to some of our systems. So you know, if something like this were to be undertaken, some of the agreements that it's referring to on, I think, 6.1 or 6.2 already exist, and may exist between and among other departments, the departments already. So yeah, so I wanted to point out that, you know, from the, just again speaking to the court's perspective, that at least two of the five identified there, well, two of the four, because the court's one of them, are granted heightened access basically by the rules. I don't know about probation and the sheriff. I'm not certain. I just don't remember. But it would not surprise me. The other thing,
we do access Odyssey.
You do. Okay, that's what it made sense that I think we do have that MOU. And then so
and
really
Matt,
what
I
this
think probation does too.
So, and again, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That makes complete sense. It's consistent with what I understand. Okay. Point being, and I won't ramble on, is that this, so by way of this, they created some sort of platform that would, I guess, and I'm wondering, and I'll just throw this out there, if that setup is the best way to go if we already have a number of what I'll call side agreements in place already. I don't know, and I'm not saying either way. But that's the, you know, that's, so the limitation here is that everybody has to have their own agreement. I'll say also, you know, the 7.4, which is on page 11 of the agenda, page 4 of the MOU, talks about third-party access. This is going to be a real big concern. And you know, I'd be curious to find out how, if there have been some sort of public requests for this, how that has played out in Santa Barbara. You know, there's public access requests to the court would never involve, like, for example, you know, we're not under the Public Records Act. We're under a special rule of court for public records access, and it excludes all case-related records. So you can't use a public records like request to get court files. You'd use a different process. So a lot of the time, you know, if a public records request were to come into the court, it wouldn't touch on this. But we have to be very sensitive to that idea, because again, from the court's perspective, the rules are very specific about who can get this data. If there's a chance of third-party access, that's where, and you know, I'm 99% sure that the agreements that we have out there have language about third party, not disclosing to third parties. So, you know, that's just something to keep an eye on too.
So I think they actually addressed that exact thing. They said, for any public records request to a party for information that may include data of the court, each party shall treat this as a public records request to the court. So it would default.
So it would default to, but again, so there is concern though, right? And they talk about this next, right? Sure. You don't disclose each other's confidential data. That's easy to write and harder to monitor. That's all just what I'll say about that. So these are just the things that'll come up. I don't want to sound like I'm, you know, sort of being negative about it. I'm not. It's just, these are the things that come up in these kinds of agreements. I know. So those are my points when I had looked this through.
No, that's actually a really good point. And I see in 8.2 in enforcement rights, it's kind of it's not really strong there. You know, it's just that it's left to each entity to monitor enforcement of it. So that is something to think about.
I mean, the good thing about this is the good thing about, sorry, real quick. The good thing about this is any third-party access request has to come through one of the designated groups. So it's already going to have an introductory step where it's going to have to be sponsored by the DA or probation. So there is a good,
and I would argue too, kind of taking it to another level, Matt, that might help with some of these kinds of questions, that if it goes to a third party outside of the county, that it needs to go to a governing board for approval. and so that it's really clear. And I don't know, Patrice, do you recall if Santa Barbara set up a governing committee on this? I thought they had something like that to establish the guidelines and to also really, sorry, just one other thing, determine what data goes into this platform. So like a case file, that wouldn't go into this file, you know, so, or I wouldn't think, but anyway.
It was my understanding that this data committee was to serve in that sort of governing capacity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I'm sorry, I do not know why it came out that way. So it's harder to read. We'll try to get a corrected version to you guys. That's weird.
There is reference to the Integrated Justice Information System Administrator, who is empowered, at least at one point, to determine whether one of the agencies should be barred for misuse. I don't know if that's part of a committee, or I don't know what that.
Okay.
I don't know who that is. Yeah, it might be in there, but I just don't remember if I saw that.
What do you call those people? Term. I can't think of it. The feds have them. You know, when it's almost like an auditor of an independent auditor of an agency. What is the term? Oh well. Sorry.
Like a federal monitor.
Yeah, but it's the actual inspector general. Is that what it? Inspector General. I think that's what it is.
Any other questions or comments? I think this is good. At least gives us a sense of what ours can look like. And thank you, Matt, for playing off the things that may come up if we try to do something or mirror something similar to this. Is there any questions or comments before we move on?
Well, we have an update on some of the conversations we've been having around data. So I think this is a nice place for that versus I don't really see on the agenda where it fits more naturally. So maybe I can offer that now. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think here you have to
Oh, sorry. I thought I said sure pretty loud. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, Peter.
So yeah, you know, I think we shared with this group in the past that we've been having some conversations with all the CJ partner leadership, just trying to get a sense of where the interest might be in kind of a first step towards some data sharing, given the mandate of this group. And we've also had conversations with a group called California Policy Lab, which I think many of you are familiar with. And so just wanted to give you an update on where those conversations are at. So, you know, we spoke with Chief Eamon Krause, spoke with D.A. Becton, also with public defender, with Ellen, and then reached out to the sheriff, and Chief Livingston put us in conversation with Under Sheriff Caston. So had some really good conversations, and just across the board, everyone was like, yeah, we're ready. I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time. We're interested. We definitely, you know that we need to and want to share data more effectively. So that was really encouraging. Of course, capacity, it was always an issue across all four systems to varying degrees. And I think we've been talking about that at length here. So that hasn't changed, but I think just the willingness and the desires there, which is really, really encouraging. Now, California Policy Lab, if you're not familiar with them, is an organization that is based out of UC Berkeley. They're not actually a UC Berkeley program, but they're based out of Cal because so many of their researchers come from UC Berkeley as well as UCLA. And they do work up and down California, really focused principally on how can public systems, governments use data to more effectively drive decisions. And it's not just around criminal justice that they're focused on. It's a whole range of different issues, but criminal justice is a core kind of area or field that they support systems like ours on. So something that Denise, you said is exactly also what they're lead researcher that we spoke to out there said is that we really need to focus on a particular research question for them to help kind of enter and guide these processes with us. And so I tried to vet some different, I don't know, areas of interest with the different system leaders to see, what might be a question that folks are interested in. And the one that folks seem to have a lot of agreement on is saying, like, let's start on something that is doable, that there's already some work that's been happening that we can kind of wrap our hands around and collect some data, and where there's real interest to see what are the outcomes coming from this effort. And it's around the issue of diversion. And diversion is really something that all of our CJ partners, to certain degrees, are doing or impacted by, and beyond CJ, right? Our education partners, we're also seeing throughout our different community-based organizations, a lot of folks contributing to the work. So I think it's a great place to start. And when I pitched that to CPL, California Policy Lab, they were like, yeah, that's a great one, but in order to even refine diversion as a topic into a specific research question, we have to have a much better sense of like how do we in the county actually define diversion? Everyone has different definitions and applications of it, and what's currently happening, like across the different departments. Where are the programs? What are the efforts? And then even more specifically, needing to dive into like what are the priority populations that we're targeting for the specific diversion programs and efforts? What are the eligibility criteria that we're using to determine who can participate in those? And everything like the number of participants in those programs. I mean, these are the kind of data that we would have to do an initial collection of to then have that conversation around narrowing to a specific research question. But ultimately, it'd be around outcomes, like which programs work, which populations is diversion the most effective with, what age range, for what offenses, what are the needs that diversion programs address, and ultimately, how do they affect things like recidivism or, ability for people to just stay healthy and well. So again, that's where we're at, because there does seem to be some interest across the different departments to look at more closely at diversion. And again, California Policy Lab is really interested. They work with a whole bunch of counties throughout California and here in the Bay Area. What's kind of nice is that they don't actually work, they wouldn't be a contract with us. They're not looking to be funded by us to partner with us. They actually receive their funding through foundations and other sources. So we wouldn't have to pay them to partner with us. Instead, any kind of funds that we can raise or identify should be used to actually build up our infrastructure and capacity internally to consistently and regularly collect the data that we would need. And it seems like that's already work that we've been looking at and trying to do for some time. That said, so CPL is ready to come and speak to our job and kind of present on who they are and why they may be a good fit to partner with us on this work. Again, what they do is really help. They're all in the business of revisiting and updating existing data sharing agreements and establishing new ones. It seemed like there was a lot of talk and conversation there about making sure we have those in place that really protect the data and the institutions. They help guide our efforts by identifying the specific data points that we need to collect. They would help us develop the actual processes and concrete steps that we have to take around collecting that data. They would advise us on how and where we store the data. They actually do that. They have like the capability and capacity to store our data, and they really ensure like confidentiality and de-identification of information, really managing and limiting access to just those that are in the MOUs that can access that data. And then ultimately they help analyze the data to kind of assess the outcomes that we're looking for. So that's where we're at. I think the ask that I'm kind of presenting to this group is, do we have the capacity just amongst our job to do a similar survey that probation just put out around data collection capacity, to start looking at what diversion programs are already happening, and then also break it down to those different areas that I was talking about. Can we do that through a simple survey to get a sense of that? Then I can maybe share that with CPL. They can help then refine it into a more specific data question that we can focus our project on. And then maybe then we bring it back to the whole our job to see, does this feel right? Is this something we want to move forward on? And again, it's really just to initiate the practice of sharing data across systems to get in that practice of identifying, well, how do we do this? What are the nuts and bolts? What are the mechanics? And doing it around a topic that, for lack of a better term, is kind of easy, right? Or it's not too it's not too arduous. So let me just pause there. That was a lot. I see Denise has her hand up. Would love to hear your thoughts and the thoughts from everyone on that.
Well, you said it's easy, and I just laughed, Peter, because you know, the place that I'm leading a logic model training for folks in our continuous quality improvement and folks within ORJ tomorrow. And, you know, the thing is understanding what the program is, what the process is, the outcomes are, and the fidelity to that program for diversion. Do we have a standard diversion program? You know, if every department and unit is doing something different and just saying, okay, you know, this kid's coming in and we're going to have them write a report on why it's not very good to bully your sister or classmate or something like that. That's, you know, is that generally a diversion program? Or like, so what diversion program do we want to implement? It should it be countywide, or should it only be about one particular region, maybe East and West County, and maybe it's more formal kind of diversion program where we can also assess the fidelity to the program as well, because otherwise we're not going to know, because the data is going to be so muddy because we don't have any standards on what that program is. But I'm so happy to hear that you're having this wonderful experience with CPL, because I'm very fond of them and they've done some good work for us. And I think they're in the right direction.
Thanks, Denise. Yeah. I mean, you hit it on the head as well. I mean, so that came up, and in our conversations with CPL, one thing they said is like, yeah, they are much more in the business of quantitative data analysis, collecting that kind of hard numbers in the data. And what you're talking about is more of a qualitative kind of assessment of talking to folks and saying, yeah, how do you define diversion? What is the kind of model that you're using? Everything around fidelity of application. And so what we were also thinking is, maybe since we wouldn't be using funds towards CPL, but if we were able to raise some funds, and Kendra and I would be looking into our own budget to see what we can even contribute to this effort, is maybe hiring a different consultant to do a kind of study similar to what probation did around restorative justice, and talking to different stakeholders, but just focusing internally first, not going outside to the CBOs and to the other folks, and maybe even just staying within our CJ system at first, and doing those conversations and asking specifically, what do you mean when you say diversion? Is it pre findings or post? You know, when do you actually entertain that? And then getting the answers to the questions that you were talking about. But that would actually require a different, I think, effort. That CPL says, yeah, we don't really do that. You would do that first, and then we can look at the quantitative data afterwards, if that makes sense.
A lot, unless there's going to be a collective decision to implement an already existing evidence-based diversion program for a particular population. I mean, that would be another approach, just drawing from the evidence-based programming research literature to say, oh, this is a target population that is of high priority to us. And this is something that we reasonably think that we could implement in various ways. As you know, doing that is maybe less community collaborative, but it is also a way to bring in the research literature on what we know works and what we know doesn't.
For that update, Peter. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I was actually hoping to maybe get some thoughts or reactions from the subcommittee. If I don't know, how does this land on folks, and what are some initial thoughts?
Well, on the diversion side, especially for juveniles, I don't think we're uniformed throughout the county. Coming from different agencies, I see different things. It's been a while since I've done it, but I would agree, like getting something in place, especially for juveniles, pre, prosecution, I think would be good.
Yeah. I agree. I think this is like timely and right in line with what our diversion subcommittee members are doing, where they're looking at potential diversion criteria, right? And they did bring up questions around needing some data to sort of support the respective or support the development of that criteria. So I think this kind of helps provide at least some starting information about how diversion is applied in practice across the CJ system. It can then help illuminate what specific maybe policy changes or eligibility criteria that needs to be updated or adjusted to account for what the respective incidents are typically that would allow for diversionary opportunity. So I think it's right in line with what our diversion subcommittee partners are looking into.
And it's also aligned, Patrice, with what we're hearing from law enforcement in the community from our Policing the Teen brain training. Is they talk about picking up a young person and they don't have a program or a place to send them because we don't have anything really built out yet for that. And if there was a specific diversion program in a particular area or a particular type of service, that would be fantastic, because at least in Central County, they're crying out for this.
What else?
Maybe so then if we are then to create and send out a survey with folks, is that a heavy lift to kind of ask the different systems to start asking and collecting some of that information for an initial assessment of what's happening now?
Peter, the JJC diversion program, right, Patrice, they collected a lot of those programs. Diversion and early intervention. I think there is a compiled list already.
Wonderful. Well, we'll definitely take a look at that first, Jill, before we, to assess if we need to even send out a survey. If there's any gaps or anything in the information, then maybe we'll send a shorter, simpler survey.
I do think, Peter, that survey is still going to be necessary for at the very least, the justice agencies to respond to in regards to what diversionary opportunities are presented and available. I think about, a while back at the diversion subcommittee, we talked about it, about a previous COCO Lead Plus project, the law enforcement assisted diversion model that was done years ago between the County Behavioral Health and Antioch PD. But what we learned through the implementation of that is that there are opportunities that even patrol officers may on their own, within their own discretion, create a diversion, or there's an opportunity for diversion. And I would definitely see that on the youth side for sure.
Yeah.
So I think that those kind of pointed questions do need to be posed, because it may be happening, but it's not being categorized or captured in a very formal way is what I meant to say.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, again, this is kind of like a first step in like a much bigger vision, I think, that we all share around ultimately how can we use data. I mean, we're starting here first across our CJ partners around in our job, but ultimately it's like, how are we also correlating the stuff we learned with our health department data, EHSD, and ultimately, so I'm trying to track like, yeah, where are our residents receiving support and services? Where are the holes and gaps? Where can we improve in supporting folks? And that's down the road. That's a big project that we've been asking around. Like no one really in the country has really kind of gotten there yet. But yeah, but we can definitely dream, right? So this would be like a first step towards that, I think.
I'd also like to add that you know, the prioritization of the type and focus of a diversion program might also be considered, because one of the things that we learned with our juvenile justice data from the JCPSS is that almost half of the intakes or referrals to probation for youth are related to weapons charges. And then what we're seeing is that the weapons charges, you know, depending upon the severity of that, a youth could come back. And I just remember somebody from the district attorney's office just saying, for young people, the issue is guns, and how to have some kind of program. If 50% of the kids who are coming through to our office every year is related to a weapons charge, that to me is a big deal, and something that would be a very worthy, just by nature of the consequences of having a young person with a weapon, and the consequences of there being an incident is related to that, in addition to just the sheer number of them. To think about how can we do some kind of diversion program that would encourage young people to be smarter about how they handle or utilize guns. So anyway, that would be something I would expect would come out of a survey too. But that's what the data is telling us.
Thank you, Denise. All right. Taking a look at the time. All right, we can move to item number 6, which is to discuss review subcommittee's additional information request for sheriff's report, attachment number 3. And
I'm sorry, I apologize, Shayla. Just before we move on, because I often feel like sometimes we'll discuss things and then just kind of leave them open-ended and they kind of left hanging. So I just to kind of close this conversation, we'll love if the committee can just give me a thumbs up. I'm going to go ahead and move ahead and start collecting some of that information that Jill just mentioned, but also working with Patrice, maybe your team around a survey for folks, since you guys just developed one. And then we'll follow up with folks regarding collecting some of the information around diversion that's happening across our different systems. And we'll continue the conversation with CPL so that ultimately we can then determine maybe an opportune time would be to have them come in and just speak to the group themselves and introduce their work. And, you know, right now I'm thinking possibly the next full our job meeting might be that time and place, but I'll continue to talk with the subcommittee chairs about that. Does that sound good for some next steps in terms of this piece that I introduced?
Do you see Chris' hand up? Chris, do you have a question or?
Just something to add to this.
Okay.
So the diversion subcommittee, well, a few things, I guess. Number one, the diversion subcommittee did sort of poll local agencies for diversion opportunities a few years back. And I just say that because assuming we can track that down, that can be a starting place for you. I'm sure it needs to be updated. It will be years old. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying here's a place that maybe you can start and you can find out, what of that still exists at all, and what, may have eroded or something like that. And additionally, to Denise's point about weapons, the diversion subcommittee also has a working group that has been working even outside of regular subcommittee meetings to build a diversion criteria. And we have definitely been talking about weapons charges. So the DA's office is open to the idea of diversion there. Now, what I will say is we had a couple of meetings without Simon, who is like primarily the point person from the DA's office on that. So when he heard that, he was a little surprised, because it wasn't him that had necessarily said these things. But, when we brought him up to speed, I was like, hey, it's your office, right? It's your office that came to us to say this is something you would be willing to look at. And so he seemed surprised. He did not seem like he had an issue with it or that it would be a non-starter for him. That working group hasn't met in a while, but hopefully we're able to reconvene soon and continue to push that conversation forward, but also have shared just some models that I've been able to find from other jurisdictions, as hopefully something to kind of sort of model something like that after.
Yeah, and I'll add to that I spoke with the with Stephanie, who's the chair for diversion, and they are planning to or would like to plan for to schedule another subcommittee meeting in September, since this last one in August got canceled due to some quorum issues. So we'll work with them to get something scheduled sooner rather than later. And maybe, Peter, that's another opportunity to raise up the Cal Policy Lab, potential partnership with them on the diversion research project. And then Chris, if you happen to have, if you were part of those earlier conversations about those diversion processes in the past that was collected, you can look in your database, if you will, and send that over. That would be great. I'm sure that was before any of our time here. And we can dig a little bit as well, but if you happen to have that, that'd be great.
Okay. Can we get thumbs up for what Peter proposed earlier?
Thumbs up for me.
Still not voting over here.
Thank you, Peter. All right. So attachment number 3 for our sheriff's request. Looks like we're requesting additional information for the sheriff's report. Top 5 bookings of offense types within 1 year, percentage and numbers of charges for most common all bookings within a year or quarterly, programs, individuals going through programs but not arrested, and in residential area of people arrested.
So I have a question. Is there a specific data request process that we should go by to request any of it, especially like top 5 bookings of offense types within a year? given that it takes quite a bit of time. Is that?
I wouldn't know the process.
Okay, okay.
I don't know, like, it goes from the quarterly report, like who's making specific requests, where it's coming from, and I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, okay, okay. So next steps for this would be to what that process is, or
Like from us to get it from the sheriff's office, you have to figure that out.
okay. All right, that's right. Any questions or comments on that piece? Looks like we need to figure out what the process is to request this additional information from the sheriff's report. This is the quarterly report, right?
So, this is for the sheriff's report, so.
Yeah, I think a lot of these came up after this committee and maybe even Steve's like review of the sheriff report and just additional information that they wanted to see. And I think this is where we kind of last landed. I'm not sure, but sheriff's office wouldn't necessarily have program failures. I don't think.
No.
But bullet 1, possibly bullet 1, 2, and maybe 3.
I would agree. 1, 2, and maybe 3, because 3 just got implemented.
Okay.
I mean, within last 2-3 weeks, maybe.
Oh wow. Okay. It's like 3 weeks worth of data on that one.
So.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of those where like that was disseminated out.
Yeah.
Out the agency. This is the new process now.
Yeah.
Do that. So.
Gotcha. Okay, and then last but not least, discuss review Contra Costa County Health Service Atlas. Yeah, I think at the last meeting, that was something that was raised, the health services. Fortunately, Gilbert isn't here maybe to talk about it, but they've created their an atlas that has a Ariana, you able to, it's hyperlinked in the agenda that's there, but it's basically like GIS mapping that gives you a set of indicators across a number of different domains across the entire county, just to kind of see where Contra Costa residents kind of fall in those various areas. So maybe if you click on explore places, see what that gives you. So by zip code, you can click on a specific zip code, just pick one, you know, there we go. And this gives you population by race and ethnicity over the course of time. I remember playing around with this, but there was something somewhere where you can look at the specific indicators, like housing, education, certain health statuses. But anywho, we just wanted to be able to share. It was raised during the last meeting. I think Jill, you may have raised this up, and so we thought it'd be another good data source. Oh, here we go. Social and economic. Oh, there's various topics. Okay. And so you can probably filter it down by zip code across these different topic areas. If you want to look at behaviors, that might be a good one for this group. And substance use. And pick anything that might be of interest to folks. Well, luckily there's a tab that says how to use it. And follow us so we can know how to best utilize the different filters. But yeah, so this is just something we just wanted to be sure we shared out with everybody. So you can take a look at that. You see at the top with where the URL link is atlas.cchealth.org. Yeah. And I can't tell you for certain where the sources of that information comes from. I'm sure there's somewhere on that website that's probably okay.
Data source.
It did give data sources. Okay. So, especially anything having to do with like education, for example, things like that. That was that. Questions, comments? Thank you, Jill, for telling us about this website. Now, the only thing, because I remember looking through this, I don't recall seeing anything related to like, maybe I'm wrong, because I didn't play with it for a long time, but I don't recall seeing very much around like justice or public safety on here. So I don't think those sort of pieces are included, given that I know that the health department does look at violence prevention, for example, as a matter of a public health issue, right? So those kind of pieces that would kind of align with some of the work that we do. I did not necessarily see that in here, but nonetheless, it's still some really great information.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I see Peter with his hands up. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious, Patrice, because I haven't really dug into it either. Do they at least have information on jail health since they run the medical support services in jails?
No, I don't think I saw that in there. I don't recall that, or maybe, yeah.
So sorry, I had to transition to car, and you might hear somebody in here with me, but it is under 18. I know health services wanted to launch this, and I know that they also are going to add more layers to it. And then I know through the work that we're doing with familiar faces, Patrice, I think that a lot more data like that will be coming forth as soon as we sort of hammer out all those details. So I think that this is going to be adding more information over time. So if it's not there now, I think ultimately it will be.
Yeah, to come. Yeah, that's great.
Got a thumbs up for Peter. Everything is all well. All right. Well, I will give y'all back 6 minutes and see you all back here September 26th.
Okay.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.